Using Visual Studio Code, using Node, I'm going to introduce you to the idea of JavaScript objects, JS objects. So I've opened up a folder that's on my desktop, JS objects. So you probably can't see that. It's on my desktop. There it is. And I'm going to create a new file. I'm not going to create any index.html or anything like that. I'm just going to create a JavaScript file. And just for practice, just to remember that how things work, I'm just going to make sure it's working. Hello, JavaScript objects. And I'm going to save it and choose View and Terminal, or else Control Backtick. And I am in my desktop, and I'm in my JavaScript objects folder. So if I do a dir, a directory listing, I should see that in my JavaScripts folder, which is on my desktop, which is the correct path, I have a file called index.js, which is the one I'm writing. And so if I type in the word node and index, I do not have to put JS. Oops, don't know what I did there. I don't have to put JS. It's assumed because Node is a JavaScript tool, so it assumes that I'm doing JavaScript, and it does say hello JavaScript objects, so I know that I'm all wired up correctly. And I'm going to use this tool then to demonstrate the use of JavaScript objects, and then in the next video we'll move back into the DOM, into the browser. All right, so I'm going to do a lot of copying and pasting because that way you don't have to see me fat fingering a lot of things. So I'm just give us a comment. We're doing JavaScript objects today. All right. So an object is, what is an object? An object is anything you can describe in our real world. And we've been already doing that. We've been writing using JavaScript we've been using objects. We've been using DOM objects from the browser, right? So we've been using either the document as an object or the input tag is an object. So, and we learned at the very beginning that objects are things which have, I said I was going to fat finger and here I do it, which have properties, which basically is a noun, and they have methods, which are basically functions, things that they can do. Okay, and we've been using those. So now we're going to start writing our own objects, and our objects are going to have properties, and our objects are going to have functions. And JavaScript objects are a very important concept. They're used all the time. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pen object, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so I have used a word we haven't used before, const, constant, which is just as you would assume it to be in other languages. Constant means that this variable can't be changed once it's created. So once the pen has been assigned these things, pen can't be changed. In other words, let's do pen equals a new string. We should get an error message. So let's just see what happens. String. And then I'm going to come down here and run it, node index.js. And in fact, I got a error. Assignment to constant variable is an error. So if I had made this a var, then this should work and I should be fine, which is kind of weird, right? Why would I be wanting to change a pen, which used to be an object, and we're going to look at that in a moment, into a string? But you can do it, but we're not going to do it. I just wanted to demonstrate the fact that I'm going to be using this word now, this what do we call that? A keyword, constant, meaning that pen will never change. Once we give it some values, we cannot put anything else into pen. Pen is always going to be an object. And we know that it's an object because we have now open and closing curly braces. So arrays are in open and closed brackets, right? So now we're dealing with objects and their open and closed curly braces. And an object can have properties. And so this particular object has a property called type. And we think it'd be a ballpoint pen, a felt tip pen, I don't know what other types, a fine point pen. I don't know. There's lots of different types, but I'm using ballpoint here. A pen can have a color, and a pen can have a brand. So when we think about properties, we think of things that would define a pen in general terms. These things can change, right? A pen can change in these values, but the property name, a pen will always have these properties. All right, so let's access the properties with what we call dot notation. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste in some code here so we can see it in action. So to access the property values, we use what's called dot notation, which means that if we want to print out ballpoint, we're going to take our variable name, which can never, remember this cannot change. It's always going to have this data in it. Pen is always going to have type, color, and brand, but these values will be able to change within it. So don't understand that, but we'll get to that in a moment. So pen dot type is going to console log whatever this value is. Pen dot color is going to print out this value, and etc. So I'm going to type the word CLR here down in my terminal because I want to get rid of all of this noise. And it's CLS, sorry, CLS. So now I have a clean slate, so to speak, and I can use my arrow up key to go through my mistakes. There is node index, which is what we would type in order to run this file, and let's see what happens. So now we can see exactly that taking place. Pen.type is being printed to our terminal screen, pen.color, and pen.brand. So we're creating an object. We're creating a generic definition of what a pen would look like. And generically speaking, a pen will have a type, a pen will have a color, and a pen will have a brand. But these values in here potentially could be different depending on the pen. So let's do that. Let's change a value of our pen and print it out. So again, copy and paste because it's easier for me to not make so many mistakes as I'm talking. So let's change the value of a property. So remember, pen can't change. It's always going to be an object with type, color, and brand. But what can change is the values within. So I can change pen color to red. So modify the pen color property. So I'm changing now this pen has a red color instead. And if we console log that and we have our concatenated string here. So I write with a concatenated plus pen.color. So that should print out the new color red plus the pen brand plus the pen type plus the word pen. Let's see what happens. So make sure you save it. I'm going to hit my arrow up key. And now I'll see that I write with a red ballpoint pen. So we saw initially that the color was blue, but we were able to change the color subsequently in our code. All right. This is getting really old, this concatenating thing. So I'm going to show you something new called a string literal. And again, copy and paste so you can see it. So a string literal makes our concatenated lives much easier. So we have to keep track here of our opening and closing. Do I use a single quote? Do I use a double quote? I got to make sure I put the pen. So now we're going to make our lives a little bit easier. We're not going to concatenate, but we're going to use what's called a string literal. So I've written, this is exactly the same line that I'm writing in this console, line 21. But what we use now is, this is a backtick. So a backtick is, depending on your keyboard, below the tilde. So in my keyboard right now, it's the key above my tab. So it's a backtick. So it's not an apostrophe, it's a backtick. I don't know if I can demonstrate it, but it is simply like a high to low apostrophe, but it's not an apostrophe because an apostrophe would look low. Well, that one's even up, straight up and down. So it's not an apostrophe, it's a backtick. Okay. And so if I open and close this entire string with a backtick, which you can see, there's the backtick and there's the backtick. Now everything in here is literally going to be written to my console, so I don't have to worry about these plus signs anymore. But when I want to plop in a variable, instead of using the plus sign and then just showing the variable, we use this notation where we'll use the $sign and then the open and close curly brace, and that'll tell the JavaScript interpreter, please interpret what's inside of this notation as a variable and plop that value in its place. So let's, just for clarity, I'm going to comment out my console log so I don't have that showing. I'm going to do this one so that I can, well, I'll keep both of these side by side. So I'm going to have two sentences, two console logs doing the same thing, but one may or may not be easier for you to write. Like this might be easier for you to keep track of than this double quotes, like all these concatenation. So which one should you use? The one that makes the most sense to you. So backtick, make sure you use the backtick, and then what we call interpolate, what plop into this string these values, and I've notated that these are variables by using the $sign, open and close curly brace, and then the object, dot, and the property that I want you to print out. So that is a shortcut. All right, so let's get back to objects. So we have a pen object, we have some properties for that object, and unlike other languages, in JavaScript, you can, let me just randomly add on new properties if you would like. So initially, we set up our pen with type, color, and brand. If somewhere in our code we decided that a pen also needed a property of price, we could add that kind of on the fly if we wanted to. So now in our code at this point, before here, like on line 23, if we had tried to type to console log pen.price, it doesn't exist. Pen does not have a price. But at this point, we've added that property, we've given it a value, and now we can do whatever we want with that new property value. So if we run this, looks like I have a string interpolation going on here. So I have a string literal with the backticks. And please console log this exact string, including a $sign, because I physically want that $sign printed. But I also need the $sign with the open and close curly brace to notate that there is a variable I want you to figure out. So remember this part, so that's why we have two $signs there. So now I'm going to run the code, and I should see my pen costs $2.05. All right, so let's do something that might have a little bit more meaning, or I don't know. So I'm going to start with a new thought, and to do that, I'm going to, again, comment out any console logs so I can kind of start with a clean slate. And I'm going to do a CLS to clear out my terminal window here. And now I'm going to give you an example of an RPG game character. Now, I will not pretend that I know a lot about video games. I don't, but I think that's a role-playing game. I don't know. Anyway, I got this example from someplace else, but it's a good example and I get the concept, so hopefully this means something to you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a character. And I'm going to create a character. I'm going to, just like we did above with our pen, I'm going to create a constant. So I have a character. Let's see. All right, well, we'll call her Aurora. This is just, okay. So we have a constant. There's our variable name, Aurora. And remember, this object can't change. So we can't change Aurora to something else. It's always going to be an object that has properties of a name, it has properties of a health, and properties of strength. And so now we can give it values. Her name is Aurora, she's got a health of 150, and she has strength of 25. Now I also want you to notice that our last value, our last property, doesn't have a comma. So, and I think if I even put a comma, I will most likely get an error. So let's just see what happens if this, I'm going to run it. Oh, it worked. All right, so I have a console log out here. Okay, so generally, for reasons you'll see later on, the last property in your object usually doesn't have a comma. So let's just get into that habit, and you'll see why in upcoming scenarios, I'm pretty sure. All right, so no comma after the last one. And all right, so now let's do some things with Aurora. I'm going to do a console log, and I have a string literal there. So we're going to console log with the backticks. Remember, the backticks is the literal, so I don't have to do all that concatenation with the plus sign. $ means, and curly braces, evaluate Aurora.name. So plop Aurora in here. The word has, put in her health, and then put the words health points and her strength as strength. And I haven't done anything with health, but that's okay. We get the idea. And then I'm going to hit the arrow up key and run that. Aurora has 150 health points and 25 as strength. Okay, well, let's say in our video game, Aurora got hit by an arrow. And so she is harmed by an arrow, so we have to decrease her health by 20. Okay, so remember we can use this little decrementer, which simply says whatever the value was in health, take that value and subtract 20. And so in essence what we've done is we've said health equals health minus 20. So now we've changed the value of her health. But Aurora equips herself with a strength necklace. Okay, I didn't make this stuff up, you guys. I got this from another example, but it's a good example, so there we go. All right, so she equips herself with a strength necklace, which increases her strength by 10. So she lost 20 in health, but she gained 10 in strength. So plus equals then is strength 25 plus 10. So her health now, if we do the math in our head, hopefully we can do that, her health should now be 130 and her strength should be 35. All right, so let's console log that out and see if I'm correct in my math. So I'm going to console log Aurora name has, and there should be her new health and her new strength. So I'm going to save that, arrow up, and now we can see in fact that, I hope I said those things right, she has, I don't know if I did or not, but anyway, I don't know if I said my math right or not now that I look at 130, but you get the idea that 150 minus 20 is in fact 130, so we can see that we have changed the values of these properties, and her health has also increased. So we've changed the value of the properties, but we're keeping it all as an object. So remember that an object is a thing, and a thing has properties, and a thing has methods, which leads us into our next video. See you there.